On the evening of May 29, 1946 in Habern, Idaho, a fireman by the name of Patrick Burns was men in the inside of a barn when he heard a voice speak to him from somewhere in the darkness. Over the next few months, several workers at the farm disappeared. It was written off as the workers went back home or somewhere else to work, as was the case back then. Two workers from the farm grew suspicious though and decided to do some searching of their own, which led them to a small shack several miles away, tucked away in some trees. Once there they found Patrick inside, and what they saw left them stupefied, something only a nightmare could conjure. This is Patrick's account of what happened and the account of Frank S., one of the two workers who found him. The following is the story Patrick told after he was captured the night it first started. I was in the barn mending the wall when I heard a voice say, "Help me, I've broke up my insides." What was that? I responded, thinking it was a fellow worker. When no one replied, I turned around, but no one was there. I immediately dropped the hammer and board I was holding as I finally grasped what was said to me. Thinking someone might be hurt, I started walking around the area to see if I could find who said it. After searching around and not finding anyone else, I decided to head inside for dinner and finish up later. As I walked to the mess hall, I started wondering if I was hearing things or if welcome to Dark Rot Legends ... where fear takes form and shadows tell their stories. Let's begin. Someone was messing with me. When I finished eating, I went to the ooze to relieve myself. As I was standing there, I heard the voice again, only this time it said, "My whole existence is flawed. You'll make me perfect. Help me become somebody else." "Who's there?" I responded as I spun around, opening the ooze door. I stepped outside and walked around to see who it was, but again there was no one. I was now getting scared. Either I was hearing things, which meant I might be going crazy, or something darker was happening. I've always been a religious man, so my mind began to quickly wander into all the ungodly things it could be. As I stood there, I jumped, having frightened myself by what I was thinking. I then went to the bunkhouse and fell asleep. When I awoke, the first thoughts I had were of the voice I'd heard the night before and realized it wasn't a dream. As I laid there trying to fully wake up, I noticed my left arm was hurting. I raised up my arm and saw what looked like scratch marks. I tried recalling if I'd done that to myself the day before, but couldn't remember. I went about my day as I normally would, without anything strange happening. Several days later, I was back in the barn again around the same time, continuing to mend the wall, when I again heard the voice say, "Help me, I've broke apart my insides." I froze as I closed my eyes and clenched my fist. I'd hope whatever it was had gone away. "What do you want?" I shouted as I stood there. The voice whispered into my ear, "My whole existence is flawed. You'll make me perfect. Help me become somebody else." Right then, flashes of what the voice wanted me to do went through my mind. I shook my head as I whispered, no to myself. What was disturbing though was something inside me secretly wanted to do it. It was an excitement I'd not felt for a long time, even though I knew it was horribly wrong and it went against everything I believed. I stood there nodding my head as a voice continued whispering in my ear, telling me in grim detail what I needed to do. After it finished, I turned, went to the bunkhouse and straight to bed without eating. I was wide awake for most of the night, staring into the darkness, thinking about what the voice wanted me to do. I started making plans to do the first step the following day. The following day was my day off, so I spent the day looking for the perfect spot to build a wooden shack. It needed to be far enough away from the farm as to not get spotted, and also hidden in some trees. After walking for a few hours, I spotted the perfect place to build a shack. As a sense of excitement again surged through me, I walked over to the spot, looked around, and then laid down. I quickly fell asleep and started dreaming. My dreams were of things that were going to happen but haven't yet. I wasn't sure how long I'd been asleep, but I remember being startled awake to the voice saying, "It's now time to get me closer to God." I immediately jumped up and replied, Yes, I then started walking back to the farm. My plan was to start bringing the supplies I'd need at night so no one would see me. I spent the next month going back and forth until the shack was built, according to what the voice had told me. Once I finished, I knew it was time to take the second step. The next step was what I'd been hesitant about, but at the same time somewhat eager. I promised the voice I would complete what he told me to do, and so it began. Now I've got no soul to sell. Patrick stopped speaking and would say no more. The following is Frank's account of what happened. Jimmy and I started having our suspicions as to why men had been disappearing, and we noticed Patrick had been acting squirrely for months. One night though, Jimmy noticed him leave the bunkhouse and not returned till morning. When Jimmy questioned him, he said he wasn't feeling good and spent most of the night in the use. We would have believed him too if one of the men from another bunkhouse hadn't disappeared that night. As well, we talked about telling the foreman, but without proof to back it up. We knew it just caused a rift, so we decided to wait and see what we could find out. Over the next several weeks we watched him like a hawk. We started noticing strange things about him. Several times we walked into the bunk house when he was alone, but he was talking to someone. Other times we watched him simply staring up into the sky for long periods of time. One night though, I was sleeping and having a horrible dream. Patrick was chasing me through a field. He had a look of evil on his face like I'd never seen before on another man. Right as he was about to reach out and grab me, I woke up nearly falling off my bed. I almost screamed out because standing there staring down at me with a look in his eyes the same as in my dream was Patrick. I said, "What the hell are you doing, man?" He said nothing, just turned and walked back to his bunk and laid down. It's safe to say I didn't sleep a wink after that. I sat up the rest of the night with my eyes glued to him. The next day I told Jimmy what had happened, and he said we need to do something soon or we might be disappearing next. A few days later I woke up in the middle of the night needing to use the ooze. I was half asleep and the thought of Patrick never crossed my mind as I stumbled through the bunkhouse and outside to the ooze. As I stood there relieving myself, trying to stay awake, the door to the ooze flew open before I had time to turn around. Something grabbed me by the hair and flung me backwards. After I hit the ground, I hardly jumped up, looked around to see who'd grabbed me, but saw no one. I was about to shout out to the other men, but quickly decided they think I was crazy, so I stood there in silence, trembling with fear. I don't believe in the supernatural, so I couldn't grasp what had just happened and didn't want to believe it. It took me a bit to collect myself before I went back to the bunkhouse. I didn't sleep after that. All I could do was stare at Patrick as he slept several bunks away. I'm not sure how, but I knew he had something to do with what happened. During breakfast that morning I told Jimmy what had happened and he believed me. He said we need to do something soon as things seemed to be getting scarier. We both had a dark feeling something sinister was happening. Patrick's day off was in a few days, so we talked about following him. We noticed on his day off he would always disappear for most of the day. We would never see him leave and had no idea where he went or when he came back. It was like he simply vanished, then suddenly reappeared. As we were eating and discussing our plan, Patrick walked up to our table and stood there glaring at us. The best way to describe the look he had was simply nefarious. None of us said anything as we stared at each other. Then suddenly he turned and left the mess hall. I've never feared any man before in my life, but he scared me, which meant something was very wrong with him and he needed to be stopped. I've always trusted my instincts when it came to people and they've never failed me. I didn't get much sleep over the next several days and any little sound would make me sit up right in bed. Jimmy and I watched each other's backs during that time. When the day finally came, a sense of dread overcame me and I wanted to leave the farm for good, but part of me knew I needed to follow him if he had anything to do with the other men disappearing. I'd never be able to forgive myself. He always disappeared right after he ate breakfast. He was always the first one to eat and the first one to leave on. That day though, we beat him to breakfast and left before he even got there. Our plan was to sit in the hay loft so we could get a good vantage point to see where he went. Just like clockwork, we saw him leave the mess hall. As he walked along, we noticed he was continually looking over his shoulder. Once he left the farm grounds, he started heading towards the foothills that led to the mountains. We watched him as long as we could before he disappeared out of sight, which I guessed was about a half mile to 3/4 of a mile away. At least we knew which direction he was going, though we scrambled down from the hay loft and started going in that direction. As we left the farm grounds, I remember being the most scared I'd ever been in my life. Up to that point, we each had pistols with us just in case, as we weren't taking any chances, so that did help some, but not much. When we got to the spot we'd seen him go out of sight, we noticed it drop down into a depression with the stream flowing through it. The area was also riddled with trees. We gave each other concerned looks before Jimmy asked, "Which way do we go?" I shrugged my shoulders and replied, "I have no idea." I say we follow the stream a ways and see what we can see. Jimmy simply nodded his head as we started walking down into the depression towards the stream. Once we hit the stream, we started following it downstream. "Keep an eye on the trees, Jimmy. If he's in here, there's a good chance that's where he'll be." I said, "Got it," replied Jimmy. We followed the stream for miles before coming to the base of the foothills. We'd seen nothing along the way and decided to take a long break before heading back. We sat for several hours talking about various things as our minds wandered away from the real reason we'd been out there in the first place. We then decided to take a nap before heading back. When we awoke, late afternoon was approaching and we realized we'd slept for quite a while. As a thought of Patrick came back into our minds, we quickly got up, grabbed our things and started following the stream back the way we'd come. We walked fast as neither of us wanted to be out there in the dark. We'd walked for about 30 minutes when I heard what I thought were voices. I put my hand to Jimmy's chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. "What is it, Frank?" he whispered in a worried tone. "Did you not hear that?" I replied. "Hear what?" Jimmy asked. "Voices. I heard voices coming from up there," I said, as I pointed up to the hill to a patch of thick trees. Without saying a word, we drew our pistols from their holsters and started walking up the hill towards the trees. I took the lead as I crept along in the knee-high grass. As we got closer, a small shack that was hidden in the patch of trees came into view. I pointed it out to Jimmy, who simply nodded his head. When we made it to the edge of the trees, I stopped so I could listen and evaluate what to do next. As I knelt there, I put my hand up to my ear so I could hear better. I then heard a strange voice that was not Patrick say, "You get me closer to God." "Yes, Patrick," responded. I was now shaking and scared out of my wits. I wanted to run away, but I'm no coward. Having Jimmy next to me also gave me the courage to move forward. I motioned to Jimmy we were moving towards the shack's door. As he nodded his head in agreement, I could tell he was as scared as I was, which made me feel better. We started inching our way towards the shack, trying to be as quiet as possible as Patrick and the strange voice continued talking about things I couldn't understand. Once we were at the door, I stood upright and took a deep breath. I raised my leg and kicked the door open. And what happened next was something I have a hard time believing and not sure if I'll ever fully believe it. They're standing a few feet away in front of me with something so horrific it can't be put into words. It was a naked man, but with body parts from different bodies. The head was one of the men who disappeared from the farm. Whatever it was started quickly coming towards us. Without thinking, me and Jimmy raised our pistols and began firing on the thing. We emptied our pistols, but fear kept us pulling the triggers. As we heard the clicking sound of the pistols hammers, the thing fell to the ground and began shrieking the most horrible sound as it glared at us. Right then, Patrick stood up as he'd been sitting in the corner of the shack and came barreling at us. When he got within striking distance, I pistol whipped him, which sent Him to the ground in a heap. What in God's name is that thing, Frank? Asked Jimmy. I'm not sure, Jimmy. Something only evil could conjure up, I replied. The thing then closed its eyes and died. The body then began to shrivel up and fall apart. The pieces looked like that of a 90-year-old. We looked at each other with looks that can't be described. When we finally came to our senses, we grabbed Patrick and dragged him out of the shack and bound his hands and feet with some belling twine we'd brought. We then tied him to a nearby tree and went to fetch help. I know no one will believe what we saw, even I don't believe it. A few hours later, Frank, Jimmy, along with 2 other men, including the foreman and the local sheriff, came back to the shack. The other men couldn't believe the horrific sight they saw inside the shack. Patrick was then taken by the sheriff and questioned, eventually telling his story. The missing body pieces were never recovered. The men that had been killed didn't have any kin to speak of, so the remaining pieces from the shack were buried in an unmarked grave on the farm. The shack was torn down and burned. The following day, after being questioned, Patrick disappeared the old Irish way, as was said among the men at the farm. The rumor was he'd been dealt with by the sheriff along with the owner of the farm. The owner of the farm convinced the sheriff to keep what happened a secret for fear it would put his farm under, so it was kept hidden for many years. That is, until the sheriff gave a sealed envelope to his son right before he died. The envelope contained the written accounts of Frank and Patrick. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe. Thank you for joining Dark Rot Legends. Subscribe for more tales of terror. If you dare.